Welcome back. I'm Richard D. Hall and I'm talking to Neil Sanders about how drugs are used to control society. And I mentioned Bill Clinton before the break there. Now I read in one of David Icke's books that Bill Clinton was running the Mina airstrip in his constituency and was allegedly importing large quantities of drugs in aeroplanes that were coming in. I mean, is there any truth to that, Neil?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, basically, he wasn't running it per se. He was just the governor of the state when it was going on. It was run by a gentleman called Barry Seal, who was a CIA contract air pilot since the mid-50s. And basically, he had a very colourful career. Going backwards and forwards to South. He's actually South America. He's actually played by Dennis Hopper in a film. I forget the name of the film. He's a strange one, Barry Seal. Apparently, he was friends with David Ferry and Clay Shaw, who were involved with the JFK assassination, and allegedly he was in Dallas, Texas on the day and left in a plane, a Cessna or something, a small airplane, very, very shortly after JFK was assassinated.
Right.
But I don't know.
Now, so how do we know that Bill Clinton had knowledge of the Mina airstrip drug
because
operation?
Barry Seal had actually previously tried to set up this airstrip, he was dealing cocaine for the Medellin, which is basically was run by Pablo Escobar for a time. The Medellin this cocaine would eventually end up in South Central in the hands of Michael Harris, or Harry-O, who was one of the principal founders of Death Row Records. Again, another way to demonise young black youth. You try to set it up in Louisiana, and Louisiana says, no chance, you're not doing that, you're not bringing drugs into our state. Mina said, yeah, perfectly, that's perfectly legitimate. And so this is where he was. I mean, he was trained at...
So has he made confessions about all this?
Yeah, absolutely.
So where's he now then?
He's dead. He was murdered. Well, what happened was basically he got caught many times with large shipments of cocaine. Sometimes it went missing. Sometimes he got short sentences. Sometimes he miraculously got away with it. He was running cocaine off the back of the Iran-Contra thing, but sometimes from the Medellin as well, into America, and then it was distributed to various things. Bill Clinton was the governor of the state at the time, and so he was, it's in his jurisdiction. But it was with George H.W. Bush, George Bush Jr., Jeb Bush, and Ronald Reagan were also involved in the process. Now, in 1984, he got caught with a large shipment of cocaine, and the CIA seemingly backed away, and he was looking at an incredibly lengthy jail term. So he decided to turn state's evidence, and he was going to turn evidence against George H.W. Bush. He also claimed to have in his possession a videotape of George Bush Jr. and Jeb Bush collecting a large shipment of cocaine from an airstrip in Arkansas, and so obviously this is incredibly damning. The Clintons...
So themselves collecting it?
Apparently so. This is what Barry Seal said. So the Clintons were involved, the Bushes were involved, the Reagans were involved.
Allegedly.
Well, according to Barry Seal, they were involved. Now, this was going to go to trial, and he was given 6 months house arrest leading up to the actual trial. Unfortunately, someone turned up with an Uzi and machine gunned him to death, so we'll never find out the extent of that.
Right. I think there's a quote in Icke's book about Bill Clinton where he says, this is not an exact quote, something like, drugs are not what you think it is, the CIA control it, or something like that.
Yeah, well, which is pretty accurate, basically.
Right.
I mean, the other thing that he was involved in was off the back of the Contra deal. He arranged for the Sandinistas to actually receive a shipment of cocaine directly from Pablo Escobar. Now, this was framing the Sandinistas, and Reagan used this to say, see, it's the Sandinistas that are the drug dealers, that's why we're backing the Contras, when in actual fact it was the Contras that were actually dealing the drugs. Now, what's interesting was this was also at a similar time, this was a sort of a counter-propaganda thing, because the Sandinistas had come across a series of American government documents that proved that Manuel Noriega was a CIA asset in the 60s and the 70s, the dictator of Panama, and he was allowing the CIA to use the Guadalajara cartel in Mexico and ship huge amounts of cocaine through Panama. It was also the money was being laundered from the Contras in the first Inter-Americas Bank, which was also in Panama. The Sandinistas found this and threatened to expose this, and that's why the American government arrested Noriega and threw him in prison for the next 30 years. When his sentence ended, Hillary Clinton personally made sure that he was immediately extradited to France and began another incredibly lengthy sentence. So he's never going to see the light of day. It's probably to cover up his connections.
Right. And the dictator of Panama at that time was
Manuel Noriega.
and a CIA asset.
Absolutely, he was a proven CIA asset throughout the 60s and the 70s, and I would suspect also during the 80s whilst he was involved in this drugs thing, although I imagine that they've tried to memory hold that so as to not show their implicit connection.
All right, Ian. Well, some of the terminology that you use I'm not always familiar with. Tell us what the shower posse is.
Well, the shower posse is it's a Jamaican gang. Now, this is again, they were actually supplying the east coast of America with a lot of crack and a lot of cocaine and such like that. The shower posse was founded by a gentleman called Lester Coke, who changed his name to Jim Brown. Jim Brown was a nickname taken after the Raquel Welch.
Lester Coke, founder of the shower posse.
Well, this is him. And what he was he was aligned with the JLP and Edward Seager, who was the JLP is the right-wing party in Jamaica. Now, they were opposed to the PNP, which was run by Michael Manley. Now, the American government also didn't like the PNP because it reeked of socialism, and we don't like socialism in America. We prefer the right wing. So they were approaching the shower posse. The shower posse made their name by, they would set fire to entire communities. He was also a building contractor, so the shower posse would go in, burn down all these houses, and then go to the government and say, hey, we can rebuild it for a price, obviously. And when they rebuilt it, they made sure that only JLP supporters would move in, and so it's a way of, like, you know, expanding your empire and such like that. Right. The CIA started to basically finance them because of their opposition to the PNP, just to use a quote.
And the PNP was supported by Bob Marley?
The PNP was supported by Bob Marley. I mean, CIA agent, just to give you an idea, in the 1980 election, over 1,000 people died in political clashes between PNP and JLP supporters.
How many?
Over 1,000.
Right, okay.
Right, okay. Can you imagine, like, barely that many people actually turn out to vote in England, like, you know? But CIA agent Philip McGee stated the CIA was using the JLP as its instrument against the Michael Manley government in the late 70s. I would say that most of the violence was coming from the JLP, and behind them was the CIA in terms of getting money and weapons in. The various other shower posse members like Cecil Connor claimed to have been trained by the CIA. Little Nut Miller confessed to 9 murders, but somehow got away with it. And when he was asked, how did you get away with it? He says, well, the American government made me what I am. Basically what they were doing, they were shipping drugs across America, from the west coast of America to the east coast of America, providing all the gangs in America with all this next levels of violence, and also shipping massive amounts of cocaine. And basically they were protected by the American government.
Right. Well, let's just touch on the death of Bob Marley. If you go on Wikipedia and find out how Bob Marley died, it'll say he got an infection in his toe which spread to the rest of the body and he died. He was what, 37 or something like that.
Yeah.
Obviously a healthy guy, very, you know, his songs were, let's say, had an element of politics in them.
Yeah.
They were advocating that people don't necessarily follow a government line and all the rest of it, freedom, what have you, and he's involved in this PNP.
But there was basically a free concert that was 1976, arranged by Michael Manley, which Bob Marley was supposed to play. He did actually end up playing. 2 days before it, the shower posse attempted to assassinate him. Lester Coke stated that he was paid by the CIA in massive quantities of cocaine to kill Bob Marley.
Right.
Later, obviously, Bob Marley got a cancerous infection in his toe, which then spread and eventually died. In a book called The Covert War on Rock and Roll by Alex Constantine, it suggests that William Colby's son basically gave him some boots, and in the boots was an infected piece of metal. This pierced his skin, and this actually caused the fast causing cancer. Later, he was taken to a doctor that seemed to have some connections to the Nazi party, and rather than actually, he was giving him a series of injections to the spine, I believe, through his stomach, and looking back on it, the practice was barbaric. So the suggestion is that perhaps this doctor also helped torture him to death rather than aid his recovery.
Okay, so do you think that Bob Marley was murdered?
Yeah, I do think Bob Marley was murdered.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
The shower posse as well, they were getting their drugs shipped to them from a cartel in Colombia called the Cali cartel. The Cali cartel is intricately tied up with the Colombian government, or was at the time. And one of the things that the Cali cartel did was they ran death squads that were basically going out at night and killing homeless children to you know, make the cities a more pleasant place to live. Similar thing happened in Brazil just prior to the World Cup, actually. But you know, these things happen. There are death squads that go out and get less desirables off the streets, shall we say. But unfortunately, as I say, we'll never find the true extent of the shower posse, because he was eventually captured. The Interpol found that he was shipping massive quantities of drugs into America, and he was captured, and he was in a jail cell in Jamaica waiting to be extradited to America, where he could, you know, go on trial. The American agents were actually literally en route to pick him up, and unfortunately someone broke into his cell, doused him with petrol and burnt him to death. I think that was in 1992. It certainly appears that this would be to try and hide connections between the CIA, the shower posse, and drugs.
Okay then, Neil, well, we're going to go for another break, and what have you got for us after the break?
We could talk about the Sinaloa cartel and Mexican cartels, I suppose.
Right. Alright, join us then.